Billionaire challenges. Black servant's son. She doesn't know he's a genius. People still remember the fundraising night at the Midtown Mansion, where billionaire Cassandra Beaumont casually challenged 17-year-old waiter Mateo Alvarez to a chess match before dozens of politicians. No one knew the boy had been secretly poring over every Kasparov game beneath flickering streetlights. That single contest would topple Cassandra's proud throne and set Mateo on a path money could never purchase. Laughter rippled through the Beaumont ballroom the moment Cassandra Beaumont raised her voice above the jazz trio. "Careful with that tray, darling," she called to Mateo Alvarez, who was threading through satin gowns with a pyramid of champagne coupes. One wrong step, and Midtown gets its first indoor fountain. Light applause broke out, teasing gilded effortless. A banker in pearls added, "His balance is impressive for someone who probably learned on subway stairs." The jest landed. 20 mouths curved into patronizing smiles. Cassandra, emboldened, tapped her empty glass with a ring the size of a robin's egg. Speaking of hidden talents, she announced, eyes gleaming, "I've discovered another party trick. Our young waiter claims he knows chess." Her brows lifted theatrically. "Chess, ladies and gentlemen. From the school of, what was it? Mateo Street Corner Academia." The quip drew a louder chorus of chuckles. A software mogul whispered, "Maybe he thinks pawns move like Metro cards. Swipe forward and pray." A hedge fund spouse fanned herself. "Oh, let him try. It'll be adorable." Each remark floated across the parquet like confetti, bright, lightweight, and almost impossible to ignore. Isabella Alvarez, polishing a silver ice bucket nearby, stiffened. 12 years of servitude had trained her spine against insults. But tonight, the scorn was aimed at the boy she used to walk to public library chess nights after her shifts. She kept her gaze on the mirrored bucket, forcing the reflection of her rising anger to remain still. Cassandra pointed to the Florentine ebony and ivory set occupying its own pedestal. "Come now, Mateo," she purred. "Show us how the other half captures a king." The guests formed a semicircle, at once voyeurism, polishing their curiosity. Chairs scraped. Champagne fizzed under crystal. In the hush that followed, even the band quieted, and the space filled with the ticking of a vintage mantel clock, loud as a dare. Mateo set his tray aside. He crossed to the board and bowed just enough to satisfy etiquette, not enough to signal deference. "If Miss Beaumont insists," he said, accent lilting, but diction crisp. His voice carried no edge. The room's derision simply failed to penetrate. Cassandra swept the white king's pawn 2 squares ahead. "E4, she narrated, as though delivering a lesson to toddlers. "Basic, but solid. They teach it at Yale, or so the grandmasters tell me." A venture capitalist clapped softly. "Bravo, Cassie. Give the boy something familiar." "Subway maps start with straight lines too." Mateo's ebony pawn slid to C5. The sound was a miniature gavel. An ex-Yale chess club president in the front row blinked twice. "He just invited a Sicilian," he murmured to his wife, who replied with a shrug. "Pizza pasta. Same difference." Cassandra treated the observation as background noise. "Risky opening for an amateur," she said brightly, eyes on Mateo as if he were a stagehand fumbling props. "But risk is fashionable." She leaned back, sure of the script. Quick humiliation, polite applause, dessert. From across the room, Isabella sensed something shift. Not in the guests, they still wore smirks, but in Mateo's posture. His shoulders dropped half an inch the way they did when he turned a page of a difficult endgame study at 2 in the morning. She recognized concentration disguised as calm. Cassandra advanced her knight with a delicate flick, narrating again for her audience. "Develop, develop. That's what my instructor always said." A congressman contributed, "And pay the instructor handsomely, of course," earning fresh laughter. Mateo placed his knight in reply, each movement exact as though he owed the board a debt of symmetry. No words, no hesitation. The congressman's smile faltered. Cassandra didn't notice. She was too busy addressing the crowd. Watch how quickly theory falls apart outside a classroom. Isabella finally dared a glance at her son. Mateo's eyes were not on Cassandra, nor on the wealthy faces awaiting entertainment. They were fixed on the 64 squares, mapping a path neither privilege nor mockery could erase. In that steady gaze, Isabella saw the first crack appear in the evening's well-varnished cruelty, thin, nearly invisible, but destined to spread. The crack Isabella sensed widened the very next move. Cassandra lifted her queen's bishop, searching for a square that might look impressive. Matteo responded before her sleeve had settled, sliding his knight to f6, with such economy that the piece seemed to teleport. A ripple of silence followed, not caused by shock, yet but by confusion among spectators who could no longer pretend the boy was guessing. Cassandra tried to reclaim the room with levity. Fast hands, slower thoughts, she quipped, sending a wink toward the congressman. Strategy takes patience. Yet impatience had already lodged in her voice. She cast a glance at the former Yale player, hoping for a nod of reassurance. Instead, she found him studying the board arms, folded lips, pursed, as though recalling lines he had not rehearsed in years. Matteo's third pawn advanced to d6, knitting a familiar Sicilian lattice. The banker in pearls whispered, "That's the Najdorf, isn't it?" Her husband replied, "Close looks more like the poisoned pawn route." His tone carried an involuntary respect that hadn't existed minutes earlier. Helena, Cassandra's closest confidant, leaned in, stage whispering, "Darling, maybe keep the commentary brief. Give him space to blunder." Cassandra forced a smile. "Blunder? I'm setting traps." She nudged her queen to c2, an aggressive gesture unanchored by deeper purpose. Matteo answered with qa5, pinning her knight and flashing the possibility of a double attack. The motion was as calm as someone turning a page. Guests edged forward. A chef-turned-restaurateur murmured, "He's dictating tempo." The remark floated loud enough to bruise Cassandra's composure. She reached for her water, more a prop than a thirst, and felt the glass tremble between manicured fingers. Across the room, Isabella resumed polishing an already spotless candelabrum, her movements mechanical, so no one would notice the tremor of relief rising inside her. She recalled nights when Matteo dissected Grandmaster games on a borrowed tablet, pausing videos to test variations against a cardboard board marked with fading coordinates. Tonight, all that quiet labor breathed through every precise gesture. Cassandra attempted a flourish pawn to g4, lunging for perceived initiative. The ex-Yale lawyer's eyebrows shot upward. "Overextended," he muttered. Matteo, expression unchanged, captured the offered pawn on g4 with his knight. Gasps replaced polite titters. It dawned on the room that the hostess had misread the simplest tactic. Regrettable, but recoverable, Cassandra announced, adopting the tone she used when consoling investors after a bad quarter. She pushed her h-pawn 2 squares, hoping to chase the invading knight. Matteo, instead, sacrificed that knight on f2, with a move so abrupt that half the spectators blinked before comprehending. Cassandra's king was forced to move. Her rook hung undefended. What on earth, she began, but the congressman cut in softly. "It's theoretical, Cassie. He's still in book." The word book hit like cold water. Everyone present understood. It meant Matteo hadn't started improvising. He was following established grandmaster lines Cassandra clearly didn't know. The jazz musicians, sensing drama, eclipsed their melody-laid instruments aside. Champagne lost its sparkle on tables, as no one remembered to sip. Wealth, power, and pedigree, all the invisible armor in the room, felt suddenly thin against a 17-year-old's silent confidence. Cassandra captured the reckless knight, trying to steady her breathing. Matteo recaptured with bishop, delivering another precise check. Her king retreated, pieces knocked awkwardly out of coordination. She looked up, seeking sympathy in familiar faces, but found instead the earnest fascination people reserve for televised disasters, unable to intervene, unwilling to look away. Isabella, heart-hammering, dared a step closer, as if physical proximity could shield her son from the gathering storm of envy. But Matteo needed no shield. He required only the board. With each move, he drew Cassandra deeper into terrain she didn't understand, forcing exchanges, exposing her queen, twisting tempos until her confidence frayed like old silk. When Matteo placed his dark square bishop on e3, sealing the long diagonal against counterplay, a software mogul straightened in his seat. "He's executing the classic mating net," the mogul whispered, forgetting his earlier jokes. The banker in pearls nodded awed. "She's 3 tempi behind. Nothing short of a miracle saves her now." Cassandra felt the verdict settle. She touched her remaining knight, then withdrew her hand uncertain. Her world built on deals closed over cocktails, and deference purchased by philanthropy offered no guidance here. No negotiation changed the value of a hanging rook. No reputation refuted a discovered check. Matteo leaned back, not smug, but composed, as though air itself aligned with his calculations. Cassandra's next move would reveal whether the evening ended in swift collapse or protracted suffering. Either way, the narrative no longer belonged to her. The crack Isabella had noticed had opened into a fissure, and every privileged onlooker could feel the marble floor shift beneath their polished shoes. The marble floor seemed to tilt when Cassandra finally slid her king to g1, the only square that avoided immediate disaster. The motion, hesitant and forced, confirmed what every watcher already felt in their tightening chests. The fissure beneath their certainty had become a widening gulf. Matteo did not rise to fill the silence. He simply nudged his remaining knight to g4, renewing twin threats against queen and rook with the quiet inevitability of falling rain. A hedge fund director exhaled a low whistle. "He's squeezing her pieces together like railcars." He muttered, half in admiration, half in dread of what came next. Cassandra straightened, spine rigid, as though posture alone might erase the tactical vacuum around her king. She thrust her queen to d2, in theory guarding the rook in practice, inviting the very snare the ex-Yale lawyer had warned against. Matteo's bishop glided to h6, pinning a knight and carving a diagonal aimed directly at Cassandra's throat of pawns. For an instant, the board looked frozen in black ice, every white piece either blocked, overworked, or hanging. Cassandra's breath caught. The congressman heard it and frowned, sensing a public catastrophe with no committee to adjourn. She tried defiance. "Bold line," she said, voice missing its earlier lilt. But overextension invites collapse. Her words convinced no one, not even herself. Still, vanity demanded a countermove. She pushed f3, attacking the intruding knight. The crowd leaned in, half hoping for a miracle, half hungry for the spectacle of wealth undone. Matteo allowed the knight to retreat a single square to e3, where it forked queen and rook at once. Gasps rippled outward. The banker in pearls dropped her program. The restaurateur's jaw slackened. No one joked anymore. Sarcasm felt obscene in the presence of such clinical precision. Cassandra, cheeks burning, captured the knight with her pawn, but the exchange merely cleared a highway for Matteo's dark square bishop. It swept to d4, with check king and queen suddenly forked by a single slash of ebony. Isabella's hands tightened around a linen napkin until the fabric threatened to tear, not from fear now, but from contained elation she dared not show. Cassandra stared, measuring options that narrowed by the heartbeat. She interposed, her rook sacrificing material to survive. Matteo answered by lifting his queen to b6, aligning threats on 2 diagonals that converged upon the battered white king. The congressman whispered the inevitable mate in 5, unless she finds something extraordinary, and there is nothing extraordinary left on that board. Sweat formed at Cassandra's temples. Years of commanding boardrooms had trained her to mask weakness, yet no merger had ever placed her under such relentless arithmetic. "We should adjourn." She started, appealing to decorum, to mercy, to anything that might halt the arithmetic avalanche. Matteo's reply was a single, almost gentle shake of the head. Not refusal, simply an acknowledgement that the game, like truth, could not be paused at convenience. Cassandra's queen retreated to c1 in search of shelter, but retreat ceded the last initiative she possessed. Matteo's rook slid to e8, entering the attack almost casually, as though the piece had been waiting in some antechamber for its cue. The ex-Yale lawyer closed his eyes, whispering variations under his breath. Every line ended in the same dark square behind the white king. 3 moves later, Cassandra's final rook fell, leaving her monarch naked among shattered pawns. The murmurs died away. Even the mantel clock seemed to hush, unwilling to count the remaining seconds of her dignity. She lifted a trembling hand above the board, hovering between resignation and one last hopeless move. Matteo inclined his head, granting her the courtesy of choice. The gesture respect offered without condescension pierced deeper than any taunt. Cassandra's fingers touched her king, then withdrew. Pride balked at the symbol of surrender, yet logic insisted on it. Across the table, Matteo's steady gaze offered neither victory lap nor pity, only the reflection of decisions made long before this evening. At last, Cassandra toppled her king onto its side. The faint clatter echoed through the chandeliered hall like a verdict. In that sound, the gulf underfoot split wide, carrying away assumptions of birthright and breeding in a single crack of ivory on marble. Matteo exhaled softly, the first breath he had spent on anything but calculation since taking his seat. The onlooker's silence, thick and raw, bore witness to an order overturned one move, one misjudgment at a time. The toppled king rested on its side like a shard of porcelain, and every jeweled cufflink in the room seemed to turn toward it, waiting for the sound to rewind. It did not. Cassandra sat motionless, spine arched by habit, but hollowed by the weight of a truth she could not edit. No one moved until Isabella Alvarez's soft footsteps broke the stillness. The mother did not step between the players. She merely advanced far enough that her voice could reach each polished ear. When Matteo was 9, she began, fingers loosely clasped. Our apartment lost electricity twice that winter. He borrowed a candle from the church vestry and copied chess diagrams onto scrap envelopes because we had no printer. Her words were steady, almost conversational, but the room heard them like courtroom testimony. He walked 6 blocks to a library that opened early so he could finish homework beneath fluorescent bulbs before my first shift ended. A media tycoon cleared his throat, uncomfortable but transfixed. Cassandra's stare flicked from Isabella to the fallen king, as though the story itself were an illegal move. Isabella continued. Some nights, he practiced tactics on an unlit fire escape, so I could sleep before the graveyard shift at the hotel. The neighbors complained about tapping noises. He was replaying grandmaster matches on a cardboard board. She glanced at her son, who sat quietly, rearranging captured pieces into strict rose ceremony, offered to a game that had given him purpose. A low murmur passed among the guests. Admiration, guilt, the uneasy recognition that genius sometimes grows in darkness they themselves had never faced. The ex-Yale lawyer removed his glasses to polish lenses that did not need polishing. The banker in pearls looked down at her own hands, surprised to feel them shaking. Cassandra inhaled sharply, as if surfacing from deep water. An inspiring account, she said, though the words swung dull. But motivation does not substitute for formal coaching. No prodigy reaches this level without assistance. A brittle edge crept into her tone. It was the sound of a fortress hunting for intact walls. Matteo lifted his gaze at last. Instruction exists in books, Miss Beaumont. Kasparov annotated thousands of pages. They cost nothing to borrow. The simplicity of the statement struck harder than any boast. Cassandra pushed back from the table. The ivory chair legs screeched. This feels curated. She gestured toward the semicircle of spectators, toward Isabella, toward Matteo himself, as though all conspired to craft her embarrassment. A stage production in my own salon. The congressman cleared his throat. No one arranged your moves, Cassandra. He spoke softly, but without room for rebuttal. Helena the confidant attempted rescue. Perhaps a break. Give everyone a chance to know. Cassandra snapped, regaining a flash of command. I will not be reduced to a footnote in some internet fable. She faced Matteo pupils, narrowed to pinpoints. One game proves nothing. Best of 3 at least. Whispers surged again, half disbelief, half morbid intrigue. Isabella's shoulders tensed, but Matteo answered before she could speak. If you wish more games, I'll oblige. Or we can play simultaneously against anyone else here. His voice carried no triumph, only equanimity, the same tone he used to ask librarians for a chair. A hedge fund spouse gasped. The restaurateur muttered, "He can't be serious yet." Something in Matteo's calm suggested he had never spoken more seriously in his life. Cassandra looked around, hoping to catch an ally's eye, but saw only the shifting expressions of those reconsidering their alliances. A few devices already glimmered. Someone had begun recording moments earlier, the red circle blinking like a silent metronome of reputations in flux. Isabella stepped back, letting space settle. Her part was finished. The world could accept or reject the arithmetic of nights spent under candle smoke. Matteo folded his hands, awaiting Cassandra's decision, with the patience of a player who has already mapped the endgame. Cassandra's diamond bracelet clinked against the table as she leaned forward, lips pale. "Very well," she whispered, "but know that I will uncover who taught you to humiliate me." Matteo did not blink. Truth needs no tutor. The sentence fell into the hush, like a final piece clicking into place, and in its echo, Cassandra realized the board was gone, but the battle had only shifted squares. Cassandra's vow to uncover the tutor still vibrated in the chandelier when Matteo rose and reached for a sideboard clock, an heirloom set to local time solely for display. He wound its mechanism twice, flipped the face so both could see, then rested it between them. "Rapid," he said, as though stating weather. 10 minutes each. The audience edged nearer. Speed favored whoever understood positions by instinct. No consultant could whisper moves in that span. Cassandra nodded curtly, took white again, and punched the clock with manicured surety. Her king's pawn leapt to e4. Matteo mirrored with 5, classical symmetrical, giving her none of the theoretical blame she had claimed last game. She lunged into the king's gambit f-pawn, racing forward a daring line fashionable 2 centuries earlier. Someone gasped approval. Daring sounded noble. Matteo accepted the pawn bishop, slip-pinning her knight 1 move later. The hiss of the clock grew audible 10-second ticks, slicing the hush. Cassandra's pieces flew, but coordination lagged behind bravado. She castled long. Audience murmured aggressive risky. Matteo answered with Kichi forward sui, dragging her king into a march across open files. 6 moves consumed 2 minutes of her time, 40 seconds of his. The former Yale lawyer now muttered only numbers, move counts, mate distances. Cassandra splayed rooks like barricades, yet each defensive thrust opened another diagonal. A pawn fork on c3 shattered her queenside. Her bishop, abandoned, fell to a knight fork. Isabella watched silently, noting how Matteo's shoulders stayed level, breath-steady traits trained not in academies, but on subway rides, where stillness preserved balance. 50 seconds, someone announced. Cassandra's hand trembled over a rook she couldn't save. She knocked it aside, then slapped the clock so hard the table rattled. Matteo inhaled through his nose, exhaled once, and executed 3 forcing moves in 11 seconds. Check, discover, capture. Cassandra's queen was gone, a phantom weight in her hand, before she felt its absence on the board. The room exhaled collective realization, dawning that the second game was worse than the first. Cassandra was no victim of theoretical ambush. She was outplayed in pure reflex. 30 seconds left. Her king scuttled to g3, then h4, a monarch turned night guard afraid of shadows. Matteo's rook slid to g8+, symmetrical to the safety Cassandra's castle should have offered. Cassandra's last seconds drained as she counted phantom escapes. When the flag fell, her king was cornered by a rook and pawn. She could neither block nor capture a mate in one frozen on the brink. She stared at the expired clock light, as if expecting it to blink back to life. It did not. Silence cracked when Helena muttered, "It's over, half prayer, half verdict." Phones rose, red circles recording. Cassandra stood too quickly. Her chair toppled the crash, echoing what no one dared voice. Privilege had met a limit. Isabella stepped forward, apron still tied. "Miss Beaumont," she said, voice level. "You asked who trained him." Hunger did. Darkness did. Every locked door taught him new lines. She let the words rest upon gleaming shoes and patent egos. And none of those tutors charge a fee. Cassandra's reply faltered. You think this spectacle elevates him? She gestured at the watching faces. Money policy media. They'll forget in a week. A new voice carried clean across the hall. I won't. Senator Vivian Lee, until now observing near the back, produced a card. Young man, MIT's Talented Youth Initiative takes late applications. Email me tonight. Murmurs surged admiration, this time, no mockery. Cassandra opened her mouth, found no sentence that rescued dignity, closed it. Mateo gathered the pieces, her pieces, and set them gently into their velvet slots, as though returning borrowed items. Then, he straightened, thanked her for the games, and stepped aside so his mother could join him. Together, they walked toward the double doors, leaving clocks, chandeliers, and toppled thrones behind. The crowd parted without prompting the way tides yield to moonlight. At the threshold, Mateo paused, turned once, not to gloat, but to meet Cassandra's eyes with the same neutrality he'd given the board. The unspoken message was plain. The tutor she feared was everywhere, hunger still burned, and its pupils were multiplying. For a long heartbeat, Cassandra stared into the calm behind Mateo's departing gaze, and felt it press back like a mirror that showed nothing of her pedigree, only the outline of a woman suddenly small. The doors closed on his heel with a muted click, and the ballroom's spell shattered. Conversation erupted, manic and overlapping, as though volume alone could erase what everyone had witnessed. Senator Vivian Lee moved first. She strode past champagne spills and overturned chairs to catch Isabella at the elevator bank. Mrs. Alvarez, she said, card already extended. I meant what I said. MIT's portal locks at midnight, but my office holds the key. Isabella accepted the rectangle of cardstock as if it were fragile glass. Gratitude shimmered in her eyes, but she answered simply, he will write tonight. Back inside, guests reached instinctively for the refuge of haste. A venture capitalist, who had laughed loudest, now muttered about an early flight. The banker in pearls hunted her coat as though it were a life raft. One by one, they filtered out heels and Oxfords, ticking across marble with none of the languid grace they carried in. Cassandra neither followed nor protested. She righted her chair, sat, and stared at the Velcro scar of emptiness where the chessboard had been. The congressman paused beside her, sympathy thin as tissue. These things happen, he mumbled. A learning experience. She did not respond, and he too fled. Helena lingered the longest, knuckles white around her clutch. Damage control, she whispered, casting worried glances at the phone's still recording exits. Delete footage, call the press. Spin. Cassandra's hand lifted, silencing her friend. The gesture contained no command, only fatigue. Helena understood and retreated. That night, in a 2-room apartment, 40 blocks north, Mateo typed through midnight. His application essay contained no mention of Cassandra, only reflections on pattern recognition beneath streetlights and the mathematics of scarcity. Isabella hovered nearby, rereading Senator Lee's email 3 times to confirm that the address was real. When Mateo clicked, submit the clock, read 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes to spare a margin, he treated with the same respect he granted a tempo on the board. At dawn, an anonymous clip titled, Waiter Checkmates Billionaire, twice hit 1,200 views. By lunch, it breached 200,000, propelled by hastily captioned shorts on platforms whose algorithms adored humiliation served cold. Comment threads split some celebrated raw talent, others dissected Cassandra's every gesture like forensic accountants of pride. An op-ed in the Times asked whether philanthropy masked structural contempt. A financial blog predicted luxury brand fallout. Cassandra scrolled until her screen blurred, finding no line she could buy or litigate away. The repercussions followed faster than publicists could draft statements. Her invitation to keynote the Global Leadership Forum was deferred pending review. A boutique equity group quietly dissolved its partnership with her family foundation, the Manhattan Chess Society, where she had planned a charity exhibition, issued a curt notice praising unsung excellence, and canceled the event. None of it matched the weight of her own reflection each morning, the moment she realized the house staff averted their eyes less from duty than discomfort. Meanwhile, Senator Lee's network accelerated. Within 2 weeks, an acceptance packet arrived on university letterhead, heavy enough to feel ceremonial. Full tuition housing stipend, an academic gambit turned unconditional surrender. Mateo read the letter, once folded it, and resumed coding a rudimentary website, boardbreakers.org, a free portal pairing volunteer mentors with kids who owned more hope than resources. Lines of HTML queued like pawns, forming ranks. Isabella's world shifted in parallel. The general manager at the Madison Park Regent, having watched the viral clip, invited her to interview for housekeeping supervisor. Attention to detail runs in the family, he joked, signing a contract that tripled her pay and added health coverage her son could never lose at 26. Cassandra watched these developments from rooms that felt larger each week. Journalists requested comment. She declined. Invitations thinned. Mirrors offered honest debate, but no counsel. Late one evening, she opened a dusty chess engine on her tablet, loaded the PGN of the first game, and stepped, move by move, through her own collapse. Every impulsive pawn push glared like a missed warning siren. At move 18, Mateo's quiet, QA5, she stopped, unable to advance. The engine's evaluation bar flooded black, a visual of inevitability she had sensed too late. She set the tablet aside and glanced toward the Florentine board, now sealed in its velvet crate. For years, it had signified heritage. Tonight, it mocked the notion that tradition could substitute for preparation. In the silence, Cassandra understood what Mateo's final look had promised. Hunger was indeed a tutor, but dignity was elective study, and she had skipped too many lessons. In the weeks after that late-night revelation, Cassandra felt the absence of applause more keenly than any public censure. Silence followed her through rooms that once hummed with admiration, a constant reminder that nobody claps for revision lessons learned too late. She tried compensating the staff with bonuses, but gratitude delivered at arm's length failed to soften the earlier sting. Deference returned only in the mechanical way flowers keep facing a lamp when the sun has moved on. By contrast, momentum gathered around Mateo with the quiet force of inevitability. Orientation at MIT arrived on a bright September morning. He boarded the dawn train from South Station with a single suitcase and a worn-edged notebook containing fragments of opening theory and half-built algorithms for board breakers. In Cambridge, his first walk across Killian Court felt less like arrival than transposition. 64 green squares under sky, each lecture hall another coordinate in a game he already understood. Within a month, he balanced multivariable calculus campus tournaments and nightly code pushes. Board Breakers rolled out a beta matching system that paired city school teens with volunteer grad students. The site crashed twice during launch week. Demand overwhelmed budget hosting, but each failure became another puzzle to solve, strangely reassuring in its predictability. On Fridays, he video mentored a 12-year-old from Detroit who practiced tactical drills beside a laundromat dryer. The boy's eyes caught the same stubborn light that once burned in Mateo's. Isabella, meanwhile, slipped into her new role at the Madison Park Regent with the same diligence she once reserved for polishing silver in Cassandra's dining room. The difference lay in authority. Now 17 attendants waited on her instructions, and she answered to no one who snapped fingers for spectacle. A framed offer letter hung above her desk, proof that stability could be earned without barter. News algorithms still pulsed with the clip titled, "Billionaire's Gambit Backfires." Analysts revisited it whenever another story of class friction surfaced, turning Cassandra's miscalculation into shorthand for self-inflicted downfall. A streaming docuseries optioned rights to dramatize the gala. Producers requested her participation, dangling the possibility of image rehabilitation. She declined. Public reenactment felt like a second slower defeat. Yet the world did not leave her wholly alone. Invitations arrived from inner-city schools, whose chess clubs needed sponsors. Each letter cited her name alongside Mateo's, as caution and inspiration, two sides of the same board. The first envelope she tossed unopened. The second she set aside. The third, from a Bronx middle school, she read twice, tracing the signature of a principal who wrote, "Our students believe even a small show of respect from someone like you could change the trajectory of their season." Cassandra laid the letter over the velvet crate and spent an hour staring at both, wondering whether restitution required public ceremony or simple private action. Winter reached Manhattan, and with it came the Board Breakers Invitational, an online rapid tournament streamed from dorm rooms and rec center basements. Mateo played exhibition games between rounds, commentating with the calm cadence that once unnerved Cassandra's salon. Donations pinged across the screen, $5.50 a sudden thousand from an anonymous user whose handle combined Cassandra's childhood nickname with a rook emoji. Chat moderators blinked. Mateo merely nodded and thanked the donor without breaking analysis. Later that night, Cassandra opened her ledger and scheduled recurring transfers to the program under another unobtrusive pseudonym. No press release, no naming rights, just reallocations of capital sitting idle in accounts labeled legacy initiatives. The gesture felt anticlimactic, yet the quiet of her penthouse seemed fractionally less accusatory afterward. Spring midterms ended with Mateo leading MIT's varsity chess squad to a conference title. In the afterglow of congratulatory noise, he walked alone to a campus footbridge and checked Board Breakers metrics: 15017, active learners, 420 mentors, 5 continents. He smiled, not triumphant, but satisfied, the smile of someone who has turned sprint into cadence. Across the river, Senator Lee finalized draft legislation to expand federal STEM scholarships for low-income prodigies. She listed Mateo as chief student advisor. His notes, concise, devoid of rhetoric, focused on library funding and public broadband. And on an unremarkable Tuesday, Cassandra carried the Florentine set to a community center in Queens, where weekend classes had outgrown plastic boards. She left it without ceremony, though the volunteers recognized her. Driving home, she imagined Mateo's calm glance, the night he walked out, not accusing, not forgiving, simply observing that the tutor called hunger had endless pupils. The memory no longer burned. It instructed. She would live with instruction. When Isabella finished her shift that evening, she found a notification on her phone. Board Breakers had just crossed 1,500 students. She forwarded the screenshot to her son with a single word check and watched the subway lights strobe across the screen. Each flash, a square, each square part of a larger game. They were both still winning.